Okay, welcome back. If you were here yesterday, we covered the myths of Gettysburg from July 1st, 1863. Today, on the 163rd anniversary of the July 2nd, 1863 actions, we're going to talk about the myths of Gettysburg on July 2nd. So we'll talk about this idea that Longstreet was tardy, that where Hood talks about you should have let him go around to the right, a lot of myths about the 20th Maine and about Little Round Top on that day. So we'll cover all those things. So here's what we think we know. This is the myth. On day 2, Longstreet stalled all day. He got dawn orders and he stalled all day long, allowing the 20th Maine to occupy Little Round Top, and Lee would not let them go around to the right, so they attacked Little Round Top, where a bayonet charge led by Joshua Chamberlain, Buster Kilrain, and 80 survivors of the 20th Maine captured 500 Confederate soldiers, saving the battle of the Union and Western civilization. Also, some kid climbed a tree and warned them that the rebels were coming. So, a little bit tongue-in-cheek there, but let's take these one at a time. So, first myth is that Lee ordered Longstreet at dawn to attack, but that is not accurate. We'll talk about that in a second. That Longstreet deliberately slowed his advance because he wanted to go around to the right, and Longstreet had the slows and only wanted to fight defensively. Well, the fact is there was no dawn order. The order came closer to like 8 a.m. Jubal Early, again of all people, perpetrated that myth at a reunion several years after the battle was over. Many of the officers at that reunion were staff members from Lee who had no recollection of a order coming at dawn. So no, it didn't come at dawn. He didn't have, he didn't dawdle. He got the order closer to 8 o'clock. The wide sweep, Longstreet is the only person that discusses that. His memoirs are the only source for that idea that they wanted to sweep around to the right. There's no evidence that they discussed that prior to Longstreet writing his memoirs. And look, at Second Bull Run, Longstreet led an attack of 30,000 people on the Federal left flank when he came in to the right of Jackson and swept them up. He led 20,000 in an attack at Chickamauga. He led 30,000 in an attack in the Wilderness when he got wounded. So Longstreet was not averse to direct attacks. He was fine with that. He didn't want to just go all the way around to the right and the big sweeping movement to get in between the Federals and Washington so that the Federals would have to attack them. Longstreet was not averse to attacking. So this whole idea that he was against attacking is just not true. And that mythical right that we have been talking about that's portrayed in the book. So, Lee should have listened to Longstreet, which, by the way, I don't think Longstreet ever said this, order a strategic mover to the south, interposing the Confederates between Meade and Washington, the Pipe Creek position. But look at a map, which we will hear in a second. And Lee had no idea where all the Union Army was, so there's no way that Lee would have agreed to this. And I don't think there's any way Longstreet would have proposed it because they didn't know where the Federals really were. And you have to move Hill and Ewell's corps across the entire front of the Federal position. And your supply wagons are strung out 5 miles back to the west to Chambersburg. So your supply wagons have got to get there too. So let's just look at the roads. You can't just move around to the right. The roads are leading you all into Gettysburg in a semicircle from north to west to southwest. So you'd have to just cut across the entire front of the Federal position in order to do that. And there's no roads that run that way until you get to that road, the southeast there, the Baltimore Pike maybe, or the Taneytown Road, if you could get on those, maybe. But you think the Federals are just going to sit there while you do that, and your wagons have still got to get there too. They're going to let Ewell, who's up to the north, they're just going to wait while he marches across their front? No, that's ridiculous. Not going to happen. And so the route in red, because there's the Pipe Creek position there in black that Meade had scouted. That red route is 40 miles long. Okay, so the Federals are just going to sit there while you march away to the southwest, then you march southeast, come back northeast, and then northwest. They're just going to sit there and wait while you do that. That's kind of ridiculous. And by the way, that's the route you have to take for them to not be able to observe you to get into position. So what about a tactical move? So, if you get to the summit of Round Top, okay, well first you got to find a Confederate artillery battery, have them disengage from what they're doing. You got to find a path to the summit. And by the way, today you get to the summit from the eastern slope, not the western slope. The western slope is almost impassable. Avoid the 5 unengaged Federal brigades that are there. Place the guns, and Longstreet alludes to this in the movie, the Longstreet character played by Tom Berenger. You'd have to cut down trees to get into action. Well, yeah. You'd have to withstand the Federal counterattacks. You'd have to withstand the Federal counter battery fire. And then you'd have to take out the 17,000 Federal troops that were within theoretical range. So this idea that instead of attacking Little Round Top, we'll swing around to the right and attack Round Top is just about as ludicrous as the big strategic move. So the tactical move doesn't work. The strategic move doesn't work. There is a YouTube channel called Mark's Game Room, and they war game this, and then they went out on the ground. And there's no way to tactically make that move without them seeing it. It would have taken at least the entire day. They would have run into Buford, because remember, Buford's cavalry after day 1 was dispatched to the southwest, and Hood would have been out there on his own, would have been vulnerable. So it's just impossible. When they war gamed it on the tabletop, it didn't work, and when they went out on the ground and walked it, it didn't work. So neither of those ideas hold water. So now, of course, we'll talk about everybody's favorite sacred cow, the 20th Maine and Joshua Chamberlain. And look, let me preface this by saying, I think Joshua Chamberlain is an American hero. The 20th Maine are American heroes. Joshua Chamberlain was grievously wounded around in the Gettysburg campaign. He was there. They took enemy fire. They stood on the line and went toe-to-toe with the Confederate infantry. Absolute hero. I will say I don't think things went down the way they're portrayed in the Gettysburg movie, and I'm not so sure that that's 100% Chamberlain's fault that that legend has got to where it is today. But we'll talk about it. So the legend is that, and this comes, I pulled this off of a historical website, okay? The 20th Maine was an infantry regiment in the Union Army during the American Civil War. True. Renowned for its action on Little Round Top during the Battle of Gettysburg. True. Maybe shouldn't be as renowned as it is, but that's true. Mustered in with over 1,600 troops on July 2nd, 1862. After Lincoln's second call for volunteers, the 20th Maine was reduced to under 300 by the time they arrived at Gettysburg. Okay. No. So I don't know about the 1,600 troops part. That doesn't seem right to me. Usually you form a regiment with 1,000 troops, but maybe. I didn't really research that. I don't know if that's true. But they weren't reduced to under 300 by the time they arrived at Gettysburg, because when they arrived at Gettysburg, they already had the 2nd Maine with them and integrated into them, but we'll talk about that in a second. They were commanded by Colonel Joshua L. Chamberlain, a former modern languages professor at Maine's Bowdoin College. True. In late May 1863, the 20th Maine was joined by the remainder of the 2nd Maine Regiment, 3-year enlistees. Okay. Read that again. Late May 1863. Now, the movie has you believe that Chamberlain's big speech to these guys occurred like on June 30th. Like a day, or July 1st, like the day before they go into battle. No, it was a month prior, and it was still around Chancellorsville when that regiment got integrated into the 2nd Maine. So this idea that Chamberlain gives a rousing speech and gets them to join, and then the next day they're fully integrated into the regiment, and there they are in battle. No, it was at least a month that they had been with them and had an opportunity to integrate into the 20th Maine. These soldiers were in a state of mutiny. So they were when they first came to them, I guess, but by the time of Battle of Gettysburg, they were no longer in a state of mutiny. The remaining men had been recruited from the same area where Chamberlain had grown up. True. Kind of across the river from each other was the two towns where the 2nd and the 2nd Maine and Chamberlain had, men of the 2nd and then Chamberlain were from. He was able to inspire them to fight, distributing them among his less experienced soldiers. I mean, I guess, but I don't know if he inspired them to fight or they just said, well, look, if you don't fight, you're going to jail. So either way, so on July 2nd, the 20th Maine was positioned by Colonel John Vincent at the far left of the Union line. That's true, but a little misleading. With the rest of Vincent's brigade also, there's other troops besides them. As the enemy began their attack, Captain James Nichols, commander of the 20th Maine's Company K, alerted Chamberlain that the enemy seemed to be pushing toward the regiment's left. Chamberlain ordered a right-angle formation, extending his line farther to the east. That's probably true. Elements of the 15th and 47th Alabama, led by Colonel William C. Oates, well, he led the 15th, but not the 47th. Maybe I have it the other way around, but he only led one of those regiments. Had been ordered to find the Union left, turn it, and capture Little Round Top. The 20th Maine's Company B was subsequently cut off by this flanking movement. Kind of true, but we'll talk about that. After an hour and a half under heavy attack and running low on ammunition, Chamberlain saw the rebels forming for another push and ordered a charge down the hill with fixed bayonets, which caught the enemy by surprise. I don't think that's true. I think there was one or maybe two heavy attacks and then sporadic attacks after that. I'll tell you why I think that. I don't think they were running low on ammunition. I don't think Chamberlain ordered a charge with bayonets. There may have been a bayonet charge, but it may not have been on Little Round Top. During the charge, the 2nd Confederate line tried to make a strong stand near a stone wall. What stone wall? I don't think there is one. Isolated Company B fired into the Confederates' rear. That makes no sense at all. Giving the impression that the 20th Maine had been joined by another regiment, this coupled with the surprise of Chamberlain's bold attack caused panic among the Southerners' ranks. This is, I'll share my site for this. So this is on historynet.com. The Confederates scattered, ending the attack on the hill. If the 20th Maine had retreated instead, the entire line would have been flanked and the Union likely would have lost Gettysburg. So in red is all the things I think are probably not true. Holding the hill helped the Union win Gettysburg and turn the tide of the war. Historynet.com. I mean, if you look up the 20th Maine, this is what's on the internet. Well, the entire line wouldn't have been flanked, and the Union likely would not have even lost Little Round Top, but we'll talk about it. So here's what happened. So you have Chamberlain's first draft report is in July 1862, and his revised report is in November 1862. Oates publishes his Gettysburg, the Battle on the Right. There's an article by a guy named Garish. Chamberlain writes his official report in 1884, but he predates it to July 6, 1862. Not true. Not what happened. Not issued the Medal of Honor until 1893, so 30 years later, after great campaigning on his behalf. There's an official record of the 20th Maine in 1898. There's a Cosmopolitan article in 1912 and a Hearst article in 1913. 1915, he publishes The Passing of the Armies, and in 1917, Ellis Spear passes away. Ellis Spear, his executive officer. There's a regimental history of the 20th Maine published in 1957. In 1974 through 1993, this is when the cult of Joshua Chamberlain really begins. Ken Burns' The Civil War really talks it up, and then in 1993, for those of you that have seen the Gettysburg movie, it's a solid 45 minutes of that movie. In 2003, we begin to see the breakdown of that cult, and there's a paper also in 2020, and of course my epic and groundbreaking YouTube presentation that you're watching today. Again, I say that with tongue firmly planted in cheek. So, the 2nd Maine were prisoners. Chamberlain's impassioned speech motivated them to fight. The facts are, so the final remaining 3-year men were transferred on June 9th. And the other Medal of Honor winner that day was Sergeant Tozier, who was a 2nd Maine guy. He's the guy that says, I'll tell you this, Colonel, the boys are putting up one hell of a fight. That's Andrew Tozier. He got the Medal of Honor as well, so it doesn't sound like he was too disaffected. He volunteered to take the colors. So if the speech took place, it was 3 weeks prior, not 1 day prior, so they had been integrated into the regiment for a good while. The, part where Buster Kilrain says, and it says, feel free to shoot them. that doesn't even appear till 1913 in the Hearst article. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Hearst article later. And Hooker was the commander 3 weeks prior, not Meade. So, he says, oh, that's right, George Meade has been, promoted to command. Well, Hooker was the commander when this took place, not Meade. So a lot of inaccuracies in the movie there. The hard day for Mother thing, there was actually 3 Chamberlain brothers on Little Round Top, not 2. So there's a picture of that. It's like a Troyani print, I think. Dr. John Chamberlain was there with the U.S. Sanitary Commission, and he helped treat wounded soldiers during and after the battle. So that scene that you see, now it's doubtful the 3 of them were together. But that whole hard day for Mother thing, again, appears in 1913. John Chamberlain had died in 1867, and Tom Chamberlain had died in 1896, so we have no idea. I refer a lot to these Hearst Magazine and Cosmopolitan Magazine articles. They really have a lot of the details that are in this myth of Joshua Chamberlain and the 20th Maine. And at first I thought, okay, Chamberlain did that, but there's some more evidence I'll talk about later that indicates maybe he's not the one that came up with this stuff. Myth, the 20th Maine was the far left of the Union Army. Had it retreated, the Confederates would have rolled up the entire Union left flank and carried the day. Well, no. The left flank moved several times that day. The 20th Maine was the left flank for about 45 minutes. Had the Confederates turned their flank, it would have taken hours to roll up the Federal position. 2 brigades had arrived at about the same time the charge ostensibly occurred. This is kind of referred to in the movie where after the battle, that guy comes up and says, we watched from above. It was the damnedest thing. May I shake your hand, sir? And I'm going, from above? What do you mean above? Yeah, there were 2 brigades further up the hill from the 20th Maine. So had they been flanked, those 2 brigades would have just come down and crushed the 15th and 47th Alabama. So, while were these guys brave? Did they do more than I did to defend our country? Absolutely. Are all the guys that were there in Little Round Top that day bigger heroes than I am? 100%. 100%. And I'll tell you guys, I think, again, a lot of this legend is not the 20th Maine's fault. It may be not even Joshua Chamberlain's fault. Buster Kilrain himself. Okay. Any man who judges by the group is a peewit. Here's the 20th Maine monument on Little Round Top. If you look, you've got these guys, I think, fairly in alphabetical order by rank. So I don't see Buster Kilrain on this list. These are the men who died in the 20th Maine on Little Round Top on July 2nd, or died of their wounds. Kilrain's not on that list. Why? He doesn't exist. There was no Buster Kilrain. He was made up out of whole cloth by Michael Shara to represent the enlisted man. And good. He's a composite character. I mean, that's fine. Understand this is a work of fiction, though. Here's the one where we really get into it. So the 20th Maine refused the line and then swung back and charged down the hill with bayonets. This is where I really got to thinking about this, So as a young, bright ROTC cadet who was a steely-eyed killer who, was Rambo II. Again, I'm kidding about all that. But we would go, as part of our training, we'd go through the woods, move as an infantry squad. And I will tell you, it's hard to get an infantry squad to do what you want. It's hard for you to know what that acting squad leader wants you to do. I'm left-handed, so I was always off to the right, pointing my rifle off to the right. It was just more comfortable for me. And you'd have to periodically look back to see if your squad leader was giving some kind of hand and arm signal, I mean, and you'd have guys just continue to walk, and they'd walk 50 yards before they realized, oh, everybody else has stopped and taken a knee. So 11 guys to get them to do what you want is tough. Getting 300 some soldiers to do what you want while you're being fired on is just about impossible. So I thought, man, this is a complex maneuver to swing the door back and then swing it forward again under fire. This didn't make sense to me. So I started researching that, and Ellis Spears says he charged straight forward. He doesn't remember any swinging door. They had 38 men killed or died of their wounds and 100 wounded. That's a lot of wounded, but not a lot. 38 killed. They make it sound like 200 guys were killed or whatever. They did run out of ammunition, but the evidence we have says only after the fighting was done and they were on Big Round Top where they did a bayonet charge just to kind of sweep Big Round Top of anyone that might have been up there, kind of almost like you're on a police line with your bayonets out and you sweep the hill to make sure there's nobody hiding up there. They were attacked by the 15th and the 47th Alabama. It was a tough fight. The detached company to the left never fired their weapons. Okay, so that other narrative and history net said that company fired and it made it seem like there was another regiment back there. No, they never fired. They didn't know what was going on. That fire could have been from the 2nd U.S. sharpshooters who were also there. And you got to have 2-to-1 or at least 3-to-1 odds to attack a position. And the Confederates just didn't have it, and I think we'll see that in a second. And again, Fisher's brigade actually came up and took position behind and to the left of the 20th Maine, so then they became the flank right about the time the 20th Maine was to have done that bayonet charge. So here's the myth, right? You got the 20th Maine, you got B Company out there, and they swung out and they destroyed the 47th Alabama, the 15th Alabama, the entire Army of Northern Virginia, and the 15th SS Panzer Division. So that, here's their line, and here's B Company, the 20th Maine, came swinging around. Well, no, B Company, the 20th Maine didn't do anything. So here's how you're supposed to think this looks. And so, 5 of Chamberlain's companies came down, and the 47th was there. The other 4 companies swung around like a door, ran into the 15th Alabama, and they all went running down the hill. So they did have a bayonet charge on Round Top. At the time it was called Round Top, not Big Round Top. And there was a small force of Confederate soldiers up there, and they cleared them out. Didn't take any prisoners. The Confederates just ran away. It's possible that Chamberlain conflated the actions on Little Round Top with the bayonet charge on Round Top later in the day. It's also possible that he's playing up a small bayonet charge that occurred on the orders of one company commander who ordered a charge to retrieve some wounded. It's some fog of battle stuff or fog of memories. Chamberlain dies in 1914, and they publish his book the next year, which is 52 years after Gettysburg. Ellis Spear dies in 1917, but first he privately writes his opinion of Chamberlain's memoir. The memoir is one of Michael Shara's sources for the Killer Angels. Well, here's his Medal of Honor citation that says, daring heroism and great tenacity in holding his position on the Little Round Top against repeated assaults and carrying the advanced position on the Great Round Top. Well, that's weird. So was there a bayonet charge on Round Top? Tough to say. And it was awarded 30 years later. Like, why wasn't it awarded within a few years' time? And there's no mention of a bayonet charge in this citation in 1893. So 30 years later, there's no mention of a bayonet charge. So that's interesting, right? You would think that would be front and center. Some more facts. They awarded 64 Medals of Honor that day. There were 1,515 awarded during the Civil War. One guy wasn't awarded until 150 years later. And you have to understand about the Medal of Honor at that time. So there was no Army Achievement Medal or Army Commendation Medal. There was just the Medal of Honor. And you either got that, or you got a brevet promotion, or you got quote-unquote mentioned in dispatches. Those were the ways of recognizing people back then. The Medal of Honor really didn't evolve to the prestigious award it is until Spanish-American War, maybe World War I, when it began to really be given out a lot more rarely for a lot higher bravery. So people say, well, he won the Medal of Honor. Yeah, well, so did 63 other people that day. And I'm not saying he wasn't brave. He was way braver than I am. But just because he won the Medal of Honor doesn't mean this story about the bayonet charge is necessarily true. So here's his official report. Purported to have been written in 1863, but we found out later, no, it wasn't written until years later. So what happened is that when they were compiling the official record, they realized we don't have anything from the 20th Maine. So Chamberlain says, let me dig out my report from July 6th, and I'll send it to you 30 years after the fact. And here's what he writes. My ammunition was soon exhausted. My men were firing their last shot and getting ready to club their muskets. It was imperative to strike before we were struck by this overwhelming force in a hand-to-hand fight, which we could not probably have withstood or survived. At that crisis, I ordered the bayonet. The word was enough. It ran like fire along the line from man to man and rose into a shout with which they sprang forward upon the enemy, now not 30 yards away. 30 yards. That's interesting because there is a narrative that a captain ordered a bayonet sweep 30 yards out to bring in some dead and wounded. Coincidental? Maybe. The effect was surprising. Many of the enemy's first line threw down their arms and surrendered. An officer fired his pistol at my head with one hand while he handed me a sword with the other. Holding fast by our right and swinging forward our left, we made an extended right wheel before which the enemy's second line broke and fell back, fighting from tree to tree, many being captured. He doesn't say 400, although that's out there that they captured 400. Until we'd swept the valley and cleared the front of nearly our entire brigade. Meanwhile, Captain Norrell, with his skirmishers sent out from my left flank with some dozen or 15 of the U.S. sharpshooters who had put themselves under his direction, fell upon the enemy as they were breaking, and by his demonstrations, as well as his well-directed fire, add much to the effect of the charge. Norrell says he didn't charge. Having thus cleared the valley and driven the enemy up the western slope of the Great Round Top, not wishing to press so far out as to hazard the ground I was to hold by leaving it exposed to a sudden rush of the enemy, I succeeded, although with some effort, to stop my men, who declared they were on the road to Richmond, and getting the regiment into good order and resuming our original position. 400 prisoners, including 2 field and several line officers, were sent to the rear. These were mainly from the 15th and 47th Alabama regiments, with some of the 4th and 5th Texas. 150 of the enemy were found killed and wounded in our front. Okay, so 4th and 5th Texas were not in front of the 20th Maine. They were the other part of that brigade that had charged. So if there were 400 prisoners, they weren't all taken by the 20th Maine. They couldn't have been because the 4th and 5th Texas were not in front of the 20th Maine. So this 400 number could be the entire amount of prisoners, Confederate prisoners, captured in Little Round Top that day by all Union forces. So this is not Chamberlain's official report. The official report is in the archives in Maine and leaves out all these little details. The report he wrote truly in July of 1863 does not have any of these details. Meade doesn't even mention this in his first after-action report that he submits. He doesn't mention anything on Little Round Top because it's just not important enough to be in his consciousness. This report was in March 1884. When the official record was compiled, they discovered there was no 20th Maine report. So 1880, I had said 30 years earlier. 22 years, 21 years, something like that later when he writes that in his official report. So what can we deduce from this? Well, 150 dead, possibly true, but 400 prisoners in 2 regiments equals, By the way, the 15th Alabama went into battle with 499 troops, the 47th Alabama with 133, so 634. And so 550 of those 634 were dead or prisoners. That seems like a lot. That's incredibly high casualties. Even in Pickett's charge didn't have that level of casualties. Oates later claimed he had 644 men in his regiment, and that number made its way into the later histories. That was not the case. It was 499. And so I think Chamberlain also included the Texas troops in his account. I think the bayonet charge went out about 30 yards. I don't think it swung like a door. So what can we deduce? Chamberlain's bayonet charge probably just restored a straight line and went out 30 yards. The prisoners were mostly wounded and may have included the entire brigade front. 150 dead and wounded for a brigade seems accurate, not for a regiment. His official report submitted 22 years later. There's no Confederate reports that refer to losing 400 prisoners. And the attackers and the defenders probably had about even numbers. You had a Confederate brigade attacking a Federal brigade on that part of Little Round Top. You're not going to make it with even numbers attacking uphill. You need at least 2 to 1 or preferably 3 to 1 odds to have a hope of taking that position. So while it was difficult, I don't think it was as desperate as the Gettysburg movie makes it out to be. So for the Confederate perspective, the 15th Alabama had marched 32 miles that day and went straight into battle. They were out of water. They sent a detail to refill canteens that got captured. Colonel Oates recalls a lot of his guys passing out from heat injuries. The 47th Alabama had probed other parts of the brigade. By the time they encountered the 20th Maine, so kind of hit this part of the Union line, come back. Now we're going to hit this part. We hit the 20th Maine after we'd already taken a lot of casualties from hitting other Union units. So the 15th Alabama, what was left of them that didn't drop from dehydration, came down from Round Top and hit the 20th Maine with full force. Oates states that he made one regimental-sized assault. So not the 4 giant assaults you see in the movie. One regimental-sized assault. And then you think about that, okay, that didn't work. We regroup. Let's get them going, guys. And maybe you have a couple of company commanders that get their companies back online to make another assault. A group here, a group there. But really, one regimental-sized assault with the whole regiment. Once that was defeated, the Confederates didn't have a chance to take that position. So it's not, here they come again, Colonel, they're coming again. Well, maybe they were coming again, but it might have been 40 guys, maybe 100, maybe 200, but not everybody from the regiment were going to charge more than once. They're exhausted, they're dehydrated, and they don't want to attack that hill anymore. So they're all going to find a reason why to not. So the 15th Alabama lost 22 killed, 58 wounded, 114 captured at Gettysburg. 47th Alabama, 14 killed, 26 wounded, and 4 captured at Gettysburg. That's 118. Now, if the 20th Maine really captured 118 troops, that's commendable. But it's not the 400 that they claimed. So, and it's certainly, 22 killed, 58 wounded, 14 killed, 26 wounded. That's not the horrific casualties that we're led to believe. The whole, I'm your prisoner, sir, where the gun misfires, that doesn't appear anywhere. Now, Chamberlain says a guy fired at him and the gun went off and then he gave him his sword. This is first mentioned in 1884 and repeated in the 1913 article. So there's a paper that comes out from Myers, and he says the Chamberlain myth has been promulgated beyond simply historians to the general public. Novelist Michael Shara magnified the already extant myth into 100-fold with his work on Gettysburg. The film Gettysburg and Ken Burns' heavy focus on Chamberlain additionally served to only strengthen the myth to the detriment of actual historical facts. Ellis Spear said privately of Chamberlain's memoir, "I've not read it through. I was disgusted, though not unprepared. I knew Chamberlain in college in 54 to 58. He has the same infirmity then, notoriously of inability to tell the truth always. So far as I have read, the passing of the armies is a tissue of lies." So, okay, what happened? Least probable that there wasn't a bayonet charge. I think there was some sort of bayonet charge. More probable than there wasn't a bayonet charge, although still improbable, is that it happened just like in the movie. Just like the movie portrayed. I don't think so. Here's what I really think happened most likely. That Chamberlain took advantage of a small-scale tactical bayonet charge by one company, conflated it with the charge up Round Top, petted the prisoner count, and submitted the popular narrative we had today. Now, I kind of think, too, other things have contributed to that, not just Chamberlain. I'll talk about that here in a second. He also mentions he saw the ghost of George Washington riding along as they marched, so I'm just saying. Now, for those of you who are angry with me because I've just, ruined your vision of Joshua Chamberlain, there is a counter-argument to this. And this was also Tom, God, I'm probably butchering his name, Desjardins. My apologies if you guys know and are watching this. Put it in the comment below how you pronounce that poor man's name. In 2017, he wrote a book, this article, which you can click on at historynet.com. And he says Spear and Chamberlain entered their feud before their deaths. Spear wrote to his brother in 1896 talking about how he's trying to raise Chamberlain's pension from $25 a month to $100 a month. He had written his congressman. For the original manuscripts from the 1912 and the 1913 articles are lost. So what we don't know is what Chamberlain submitted to the Hearst publication and to Cosmopolitan magazine. This is the age of yellow journalism. So did they embellish Chamberlain's story? Are they the ones that perpetuated this myth? We don't know what Chamberlain submitted. We do have some fragmentary marginal notes where, like, there's an incident about a dog, and it's like, take out the stuff about the dog, and they left it in. So it's quite possible that the yellow journalists of the early 1900s have taken this myth and stretched it as well. So he theorizes that the articles amplified what Chamberlain submitted. He said, the Hearst editors mutilated and corrected my Gettysburg. And so that Hearst maybe made a lot of these fabrications and not Chamberlain. So that's possible. And look, again, I'll say, Joshua Chamberlain's an American hero. The guys of the 20th Maine are American heroes. They did incredible things, but it may not have been how the movie portrayed it. But to stand toe-to-toe facing a regimental charge of Confederate infantry, you got to have guts, man. And they did. They stood there and they fought them off. That's good enough for me. So, and then the next day, like, where are we going? The safest place in the battlefield. Yes, this is a July 3rd myth, but still the 2nd Maine, so I'm going to keep it here. So he reported Winfield Scott Hancock and relayed the bayonet charge and discussed Hancock's friendship with Low Armistead. You remember that in the movie. So they repositioned from Little Round Top to Cemetery Ridge, and they were shelled as part of Pickett's charge. And then because of that, Tom Chamberlain heard Low Armistead's dying words. Chamberlain's corps commander was Sykes of the 5th Corps, not Hancock. And the 20th Maine sat out the rest of the fight between Cemetery Ridge and Little Round Top. So were they on Cemetery Ridge? Yes, but they were off to the side, which was not the focal point of Pickett's charge. And I don't think a regimental commander is just going to come up to a corps commander and start talking about personal things. It just was not what happened. He may report like to an acting brigade commander or a division commander or something of that nature. Maybe his own corps commander, but he's not going to go to some random corps commander and just start, talking about Hancock's buddy. And, is there anywhere where anything talks about, friends being on opposite sides of the battle? Like, you're some rando colonel I just met. No, that's not going to happen. So post-battle, 10 Federal regiments were on Little Round Top. Most regimental commanders were dead within a year or KIA that day. Strong Vincent died of his wounds. Warren was disgraced before the end of the war. Oates inflated his strength as part of a feud with Longstreet. And so, as Gary Edelman from those guys are my heroes, man. I would love if somebody from American Battlefield Trust would watch this video and comment on it. But Gary Edelman says it helps if you can live and write, and I think, yeah, it does. And Chamberlain lived, and he could certainly write as a college professor, so that helped. Here's Jeff Shara. He says The Killer Angels has to be called fiction. And he says Ken Burns took his vision of Chamberlain from The Killer Angels. It expands the, I hate to say myth, but expands the mythological stature of Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. At the end of the day, The Killer Angels is a good book. Look, I agree. The Killer Angels is the book that I was required to read as a young Army cadet. I think every Army officer, cadet, or candidate was required to read that with ROTC, West Point, or OCS. And it's a great book. It's the book that rekindled my interest in history and got me here today. So absolutely, it's a good book. But it is a work of fiction. And look, here's what I think this is the Wikipedia entry, and it's under fiction. So there you go. It's a fictional book. Let's look at the casualties on July 2nd. So did the 20th Maine take higher casualties? Yes, but not that much higher than the 44th New York. Total, Vincent's brigade were 384. Total casualties on Little Round Top were 536, because they were not the only brigade on Little Round Top. There were, like I said before, 10 regiments, 4 in Vincent's brigade and several others. So look, I think they fought a hard fight at Little Round Top. They took 33% casualties. They defended our freedom. There was likely a small-scale bayonet charge to police up the battlefield. Despite no last-ditch bayonet charge and no last-stand defense of the flank, these men were American heroes who deserve our respect. Absolutely. We wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for men like these. Chamberlain suffered grievous wounds later in the war and is an American hero despite his embellishing of the actions on July 2nd. So like, why? Why? History should be tidy in the minds of the popular audience, and that means that existing narratives such as Chamberlain's self-aggrandizing after the war became immutable after being the focus of so many books, television, documentaries, and Hollywood movies. What has become fixed in the popular mindset cannot be easily dispelled. Chamberlain's bravery is undeniable, wounded in the service of his country. Man, I agree with that. But Chamberlain's vanity must be remembered. That's from the Myers paper. And that's in my sources here. So if you want to go look at some of these things yourself, please do. Don't take my word for it. Go look. Go back and click on look on some of the things I referenced in the presentation, and look for yourself. So hey, thanks for watching. I appreciate it, and I hope you guys watch tomorrow when we finish this up with the myths of July 3rd. Thank you.